Yeah. We're live on YouTube.
All right. Welcome, everybody. House Energy and Digital Infrastructure. It's Wednesday, April 23rd. And we are working on H121. No, H181. I'm Rep. Kathleen James from Manchester.
Richard Bailey from Memorial 2.
Chris Morrow with Windsor, Bennington.
Michael Southworth, Caledonia 2.
Christopher Howland, Rutland 4.
Dara Torrey, Washington 2.
Graham Kleppner, Chittenden 13, Burlington.
Laura Civilian, Wyndham 2.
Jack Locker, Committee Assistant.
Great.
Andrew Brewer with Downs, Rackland, and Martin. And on this bill, I'm taking off my consolidated hat and putting on my two other hats for the Architects Association and the Home Builders Association.
Great.
You'll be hearing from.
All right. Thank you. And Representative Campbell is joining us online. And for the record, Kelly.
Hi, I'm Kelly Wander, and I'm the Assistant Director of the Efficiency and Energy Resources Division in the Department of Public Service. So you want me to just jump in?
Yeah, jump right
in. Great. So I'm here to provide comments on H181, that act relating to residential and commercial building energy standards. And we have a few concerns with the bill. And I'll start
with Kelly.
Yeah.
I am so sorry. I told you to jump right in.
Oh.
We're a new committee. Could you just quickly tell us a little bit about the Energy Efficiency and Energy Resources Division at the department? Sorry about that.
Sure, no problem.
Great.
So the Efficiency and Energy Resources Division, probably one of our primary tasks is we oversee the energy efficiency utilities. So we work on the programs and budgets. We verify the energy savings that they claim, and that kind of work. We also work on the building energy standards as one of our tasks. We have two engineers who do all sorts of work, including the building energy standards, but it's actually not primary amount of their time. And we also work on the tier 3 of the renewable energy standard, which is the fossil fuel reduction programs with the distributed utilities, and oversee those, both looking at those savings claims as well as the plans from the utilities and what they're going to do on an annual basis.
Great. Thank you.
Okay. Now I'll dive in.
Yeah, now dive
in. So not to start on a negative, but we do have some concerns about the bill. And some of the biggest concerns are not probably surprising to the committee, Section 2 and Section 4. So starting in Section 2, the Building Energy Code Working Group is extended in perpetuity until the General Assembly enacts legislation giving authority to a state entity to enforce the building energy codes. After this summer, the department will have participated in and staffed this working group for 3 years. And this has been a very resource intensive group. We've had participation from 2 to 3 department staff members, one of our lawyers, as well as hiring a contractor, which was Energy Futures Group, to assist with the facilitation and the writing of the required reports. The department no longer has the federal funds available to hire a contractor to staff this working group. So for this last year, it'll just all be department staff. Because it's so resource intensive, and as I've said, we have very little staff that work on this issue to begin with, it would be detrimental for the department to continue this group, staffing this group on a long-term basis without additional resources to do the work. It's also become increasingly difficult, and say maybe awkward for the department to oversee this working group, as we do not agree with one of the main recommendations of many of the members, which I think you're going to hear about later from others that are testifying, to designate the Division of Fire Safety as the authority having jurisdiction over the energy codes. And we feel if the intent is to continue in that direction and draft legislation, putting that recommendation in place, that it seems like it would be more fitting to have the working group staffed by legislative council instead of the department. So it's just going to pause in case there's questions, or I can continue on to section 4.
I had a couple. Oh yeah, Rep. Kleppner.
So do you, you don't agree with the designation of the Division of Fire Safety for the agency with jurisdiction? Do you have thoughts as to where that would more properly sit? Should energy codes end up with an enforcement function?
I think it's more that not only do we not agree with it sitting at the Division of Fire Safety, we don't agree that there needs to be that mechanism. We believe that going other routes can increase compliance, like education and training of the builders and contractors. We have very good compliance, as it says in the findings, on the commercial energy standards, and there is no such enforcement on that side, although there is licensed professionals that are involved, typically architects and such. But we don't think the enforcement route is the right way to go, because we do feel like it will be very costly for the state of Vermont.
Thank you.
Yeah.
How much did it cost us to have the Energy Future Groups, your outside consultant?
That was about a $50,000 a year contract.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, Representative Morrow.
I'm curious about the federal funding that you lost. What funding mechanism was that?
We didn't lose the federal funding. We still have it for now, which everyone I'm sure has heard about how unstable the federal funding generally is, but we had to move more of the funding into funding staff positions in our state energy office, as we've gotten more grant funding from the federal government versus doing other things like supporting the Building Energy Code Working Group. So it's more a decision of where to apply the funds than loss of funds in that case.
Representative Torrey.
Kelly, so you don't like the idea of this long-term commitment for the working group, but are you funded through fiscal year 26 to support?
Well, as I said, I mean, we're going to have to cobble together with the existing department staff for this next year, because we cannot hire a contractor. So we're going to do the best we can, but it does take our staff away from the other things that they're working on, of course, to shift those priorities. So we'll do the best we can with the staff that we have.
Okay, and the second question is just off the top of your head, do you recall what that compliance percentage is for commercial? I know we were told
I believe it was 87%. But and there is a statement in the findings that both commercial and residential are declining. But I believe the prior market assessment we did was 90%, and the decline was, or 92 maybe, the decline was within the margin of error. So I wouldn't necessarily say it was declining. And we are getting in the process, we're just getting the contracts together to do another set of market assessments. We're a little leery of putting too much on the compliance rate on the residential side, as it was during COVID and it was a very small sample size. It was only 20 homes, which is very small considered what we would typically do. And we're getting ready again to do those market assessments, and hopefully we'll have better participation and a wider group of homes that we'll be looking at. And I will also point out, might be interesting information, that we do plan on not only looking at the compliance rate, but how much, I guess you would say, they comply, and what amount of energy savings maybe are left on the table for where they don't comply. Because obviously, for those homes that don't comply, it could be one very small component or could be one large component. And we have a general idea of where they fail, but we're going to dive deeper into that to really try to assess the kind of foregone energy savings through if a home doesn't or a building doesn't comply.
Thanks.
Representative Campbell.
Yeah, thank you. I'm going to get off screen because I'm not appropriately dressed, but I just wanted to explore that a little bit more, Kelly. How are you going to judge compliance?
Well, we judge compliance by whether the building, the home or building in the sake of commercial, technically complies with the code. So for a home, we do blower doors. We look at visually what you can see as far as compliance. Of course, we can't know exactly what's in the walls. So there's an assumption that might be made based on the blower door that it does comply with things you can't see, like insulation levels, but that's what we do. We don't include what we call administrative compliance. So whether someone fills out a certificate or not, that's not included in those percentages. So we don't count that as non-compliance with the technical components of the code.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I wanted to ask about that. But you are going to make an assessment about the proportion of projects where the RB certificate is filed. You'll look at that as well. It's just
Yes.
that it won't be a factor in judging compliance. So it sounds like you're planning to do actually inspections, site inspections.
We always do on sites for the market assessments, but
Mhm.
again, they were much lower than in previous years because of people being hesitant to have people in their homes.
Sure. How far along are you in that process of designing the compliance process?
Well, we're for the market assessment,
Yes.
we're just getting it under contracts right now.
Right. Do you have any idea how many sites you might be able to access for inspection?
I'm not sure. I'm not on the team for the market assessment, so I could check and look. I know in the past it's been 100, but I'd have to look at the scope of work to see exactly what is in there, but I'm happy to let you know.
Yeah. Obviously, an intensive process.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Kelly, I had a couple questions, but I think I think I'll hold mine. So
Okay.
off you go. Thanks.
Okay. So on to section 4, the residential building energy standard statute language is being modified to say that prior to final adoption of the rule, the advisory committee may provide the department with recommendations for revision of the RBs after they review the associated software and handbook guidance for the update. So
can I interrupt? I'm sorry. I
Yep.
did have one other question, which I may not be for you, Kelly, but maybe it's for I don't know who would know. You said something in your previous section about this working group would be more properly staffed by legislative council than the department. And I'm just wondering, is there, I don't know, how do we do that? Would that require a statute change? It sounds like it would, or rather a bill, not a statute change, but it required changing the language in the bill, wouldn't it?
yes,
In the existing,
yes, I believe so. The language, as I read it in this bill, just extends the existing building energy working group, which is says very specifically to be administered by the department.
Yeah, and that's in session law, I think. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, that would have to be changed. All right, thanks. Sorry to interrupt.
No problem. So again, the language is being modified to say that prior to final adoption, the advisory committee could review the associated software and handbook and then provide feedback on how it could be, the rules could and the provisions could be changed. However, it's backwards because the handbook and the software are not developed until after the rules, which include all the requirements and the provisions for the building energy standards, are finalized. The software is actually developed by the Pacific Northwest National Lab, or PNNL, based on the International Energy Conservation Code, or the IECC. And once we have fully adopted our standards, then they just modify their software to incorporate the Vermont specific provisions. So it's a very technical update of the software. It's not changing anything from what's been adopted. It's just incorporating those into their existing software. I also wanted to mention that the advisory committee does have multiple opportunities to comment on the standards and the provisions themselves before they're adopted. The department has meetings with the advisory committees to discuss the potential changes to the standards, to obtain feedback, and then we provide a very long comment period. I think this last time it was maybe 2 months on the written proposed language before we even go into the rulemaking process, before it's even submitted. So, and then obviously there's also additional opportunity during the rulemaking process for the public to submit additional comments between ICAR and LCAR. But then once the rules are approved and finalized and adopted, then the department starts the process of creating the materials and the tools like the software that can be used by the building community to meet the actual standards. At that point, the department can't make any changes to the adopted rules. So that really would not be an appropriate time to say, oh, wait, we don't like this particular provision. It needs to be changed. Like it's too late at that point.
So if I give just a little background on this, this provision in the bill came from discussion during the course of the Energy Code Working Group from contractors who were concerned about the timing of the rollout of the last set of Energy Code upgrades, which was delayed by LCAR. It was originally, I think, supposed to be implemented in September 23 or something like that, 2023, and then it was delayed until last July, pending the discussions in the course of the working group, and in the hopes that the working group would come up with some recommendations. So I don't really know the process, but the process that you just elucidated, Kelly, and I don't really know how to make it work better for contractors and probably designers, also probably architects as well, so that they have some advance notice about the standards that they will have to adhere to for their projects that might be 6 months out. So
yeah, I think a lesson the department learned in this go around, which we're not happy with how everything rolled out, but again, we do have limited staff and other extenuating circumstances. Like we had a pause with communications with PNNL once the new administration came in. They weren't allowed to speak to us for many months. So we're just now, they just broke that communication silence, and we're back picked up developing the software with them. So that was problematic. But I would say that through the rollout and the challenges we've had with creating the materials, we would not have an effective date probably sooner than a year from when we adopt a new standard to allow plenty of time for the department to complete the companion materials, which we're not required to do. All we have to do is the rule, and the requirements are in the rule, but it's not a user-friendly format. It's in the form of amendments, and it's a little clunky. So we do produce the handbook. We also work with the International Code Council to produce code books that have kind of the all-in language, which is also in red line form on our website when we're going through the rulemaking process, because it's really what builders and architects are more used to looking at versus the rule amendments. They're not particularly user-friendly.
Okay, well, I think this is something that can be worked out, you know, and maybe I hope in the course of discussions this year in the working group, we can sort of figure out how to make this work for everybody.
Okay. So I'll continue. There's something else. Some other comments that we had was in section 5. It states that the Department of Public Service, in consultation with the energy efficiency utilities, the Office of Economic Opportunity, and any other entities claiming energy or emission savings, shall develop a methodology for calculating and reporting greenhouse gas reductions annually. By who is listed here, and it appears the intent is to develop this methodology for weatherization projects and programs, but it's not specific. So I would suggest just inserting that into the sentence so it's clear.
Again, just it's a little background. The point of this section was to provide a metric for state-funded energy savings programs that translates energy savings into greenhouse gas reductions in view of the requirements, the Greenhouse Gas, Global Warming Solutions Act requirements. So that was the intent here, was to come up with a really robust methodology that weatherization could use, Efficiency Vermont could use, Vermont Gas, all of the state-funded efficiency programs could use for providing a really hard number, a legitimate estimate of greenhouse gas savings from various activities. And ultimately, that was not stated in the language here, but ultimately that could perhaps be a metric for measuring success. But that's sort of the background on this section.
Okay, yeah, I guess it's still not clear to me if you're talking about any kind of energy savings. Like there's a wide swath of what that would entail, and the energy efficiency utilities do claim greenhouse gas reductions from those savings. So I'm not sure if it's just standardizing them between all of the EEUs and DUs. Like, yeah, I'm still kind of not clear of what this.
I think standardizing is standardizing and again making those calculations rigorous enough to be reliable. And I guess I'm not sure that they are now. My past experience in the weatherization program gave me a certain amount of pause about the energy savings estimates that weatherization is able to come up with. Typically, I don't want to disparage weatherization; they do a terrific job, but it's important to have a pretty tightly figured number for what your greenhouse gas emissions savings is going to be if you're targeting a requirement by a certain date. So that's the point. That's the point of this. It's sort of a sidelight to the thrust of the bill, but it feels like an important point to emphasize. So that's why it's in there.
Okay. The last comment we had was regarding section 1, number 8 of the findings. The department doesn't agree with the wording of this finding that states there's no state agency to interpret or administer energy codes. The department does administer the energy codes, and as the promulgator of the rules, we provide interpretation of the requirements, and we do that all the time. We get calls from builders, even Efficiency Vermont sometimes asking us what something means. So we would recommend striking interpret and administer from the first sentence of that finding and administer from the last sentence of that finding.
Well, this has to do with really who is able to give, in effect, legal advice about what a particular provision of the code means and what is required, and also who is authorized to adjudicate differences between, or sort of conflicts between codes. Say, energy code might require one thing, fire and safety code might require something else. So that maybe we have to think of different terms here. But the point isn't that the department doesn't develop the codes and the updates and even provide interpretations. But the question is, what is the legal standing, I think, of those interpretations?
Yeah, we do provide guidance if there is conflicting language between different codes, but we also have provisions in the actual code language that says that it defaults to like the fire and safety code if there is a conflict. So we can talk that through with folks as well, but generally we defer to that code if there is a conflict. But the Division of Fire Safety does participate in our code update process, and we of course hope to, through that participation, to avoid conflicts. But if there is one, that's how we handle it.
Okay. More grist for the conversation this summer.
Sure.
Great. Kelly, Rep Troy?
Sure.
Yeah, go ahead.
Just back to section 5, the discussion about the methodology of greenhouse gas reductions. I was just wondering how that information would get collected and shared with the Climate Action Office and their measuring progress tool, because they're not mentioned as one of the entities, but I imagine you guys get the data and then the data ends up accessible to them. Is that?
I can look into that. I'm not actually sure. I'm not involved with that work, but that was going to be one of my comments, but I don't think we would definitely have to work with ANR, but I don't think the language needs to say that because we would. But yeah, that was one of my thoughts as well, is we certainly wouldn't be able to do it in a vacuum as they are the holder of the greenhouse gas inventory. So, and it was under that subsection that says the ANR will coordinate with us. So I figured, okay, it's covered, but we would do it anyway.
Kelly, I had a kind of a final question for me anyway. I think just the only question I have is that, since DPS, is the agency that it interprets and administers, but you're recommending that fire safety not sort of enforce or, you know, work on compliance. Sounded like you think that the future, you know, that going down the enforcement and compliance route, you don't think it should be fire safety, and you think that that would be too costly, and that you'd recommend instead more of a training and outreach and education approach. So who would do that work? Is it less expensive than enforcement and compliance? Would it be as effective? So I guess I'm just trying to boil it all down in my mind and think, well, then how do you guys think that we can, you know, really do a better job of making sure that the RVs are being used and adopted and accomplishing what they're supposed to accomplish? Like, what's the path then?
Right. So I just want to be clear, we separate enforcement and compliance, right? We think
Okay.
of enforcement as going on site, inspections. That's what we would consider enforcement. We do think that there's opportunity to increase compliance with the standards without having that on-site inspection. So one of the ways is definitely to educate and train the building community. We now have the contractor registry, and there's the possibility to put certifications on there that would certify people are knowledgeable about the building energy standards. And the Office of Professional Regulation is working on those certifications. We now have the registry, so we even know who all the builders are. So we can even outreach to them and let them know about training and materials that are available, that we didn't have that before. So we think that there's those kind of mechanisms that we can use to increase compliance without going to the inspection kind of punitive route, which, you know, the best thing is to have a trained, educated workforce who know what they're doing, regardless of whether someone's looking over their shoulder or not. And it's very costly to have someone doing that. So that's kind of what our response is on that.
And thanks that actually, thanks for breaking those out for me. That's important. And what kind of resources that's work that DPS would oversee, and what kind of resources do you think that would take?
Well, right now, there's a variety of resources to do the work. One thing we did this year that is different than other years is the Residential Building Energy Standard Handbook typically had just included more easily to understand, you know, language about the provisions in the code. But this year, for the first time, we actually hired someone who had wrote a book about building science to help us add a building science chapter to the handbook with some information about moisture management and other best practices and other things to be more informative than just this is how you follow the energy standards. So that's one place that we've beefed, you know, education and material outreach up. Efficiency Vermont and our contractor who helps do the code updates, which was Energy Futures Group for this last update, both have done trainings on the new standards and will continue to do that. That's part of the work that Efficiency Vermont does, is conduct those trainings. They've also been recorded and are available on their webpage, so anyone can. That was part of our contract for the code update. We always typically do that to have those recordings available for people who can't attend, you know, at the time or in person. So,
And would it take staff or money to really keep building out those compliance resources and efforts?
Sure. Like, I think to do more would cost more. We do the amount we do with what we have. So if there was a desire to have more, I think that would be, you know, potential increase in cost and need for funding.
Rep. Simelia?
Thanks, Kelly. Do you think that RV's compliance would be approved by adoption of a statewide residential code.
I'm not sure the question. If there is a statewide residential energy code, are you talking about the construction code or are you talking about enforcement?
Building code.
A building code. Would adopting a residential building code impact energy code compliance? Well, I mean, I think that's an interesting question because previously, a number of years ago, you know, I had looked at some other states and read some other reports about building energy standard compliance in other states. And I found it interesting that some of the states that did have code officials really did not have better compliance on the building energy codes than we did, because they said that their code officials really focus on health and safety and the building code component and prioritize that and wasn't really inspecting for the energy code necessarily. So I don't know the answer to that, but I do know that there's that anecdotal information out there. So
Representative Howard?
I got on a Department of Public Safety work site, and there has been previous testimony alluding to there is not a building code adopted in the state of Vermont, but the public safety website said they had adopted the International Building Code and the International Commercial Code. And I'm not I have the two kind of written down here. I concentrated on the building code, which is the stress, strain, size of material, building loads, snow loads, live loads, and the like. And in my experience, which goes back to about 1984, when energy first became concentration, I was working under BOCA, Building Officials of America at the time. And I think they added chapter 24 about 1984, which was the energy code that came. And you learn from your experience, and I got spoken to by a Connecticut inspector for my misinterpretation or misapplication of the code. And then the ICC or international came along, BOCA, Southern Building Code, all merged into this. So my point here is that I view the energy code as a subset of the building code. And if the building code is already adopted by the public safety as fire code, electrical code, boiler codes, those are all adopted in there. The energy code probably as a subset ought to be under
The division.
the Division of Public Safety. Nothing's going to fall down here. The moisture control is kind of particular to energy, but I feel there's not going to be any enforcement. I think you got to educate, and in order to educate, I think you have to examine. So like engineers, architects, and the like, they all take exams that they at least know on paper of how it's supposed to be built. I think that's the direction we should be going in.
Kelly? Do you have thoughts on that?
Yeah, the Division of Fire Safety has adopted the building code for on the commercial side, but there's no residential building code for single family homes outside of the Division of Fire Safety's purview. But I would suggest you have Michael DeRocha, the director of the Division of Fire Safety, in to discuss all of that. And the building code is not my exact wheelhouse. So he would better be able to speak to that and how all the codes typically work together and how they work together for them on the commercial side. But they don't currently have authority over single family homes.
Yeah, the village.
Okay.
Yeah, into the building. Yeah. Sure.
Alrighty. Okay. Do we have more? Kelly, do you have any more to add, or do we have more questions for Kelly?
Everyone wants to get to lunch.
Maybe
I'm between you and lunch.
I'll just follow up on one thing that Rep. Howland said, which is really suggesting that we have, in effect, licensing for contractors in addition to just registration, because that is one of the ways that you can have credentials and test for competence for contractors. And that's what we do for architects and engineers and other trades, actually. And that's one of the reasons, as Kelly mentioned, that's one of the reasons why the compliance rate with commercial codes is so much higher, is because people in the commercial world have typically have licenses, and their licenses are on the line if they don't follow code. So that is an avenue that is worth exploring. I just wanted to mention that.
Okay. Kelly, thank you so much for joining us and for your testimony. Really appreciate it.
Yep.
And